68 years, almost to the day, was when I conducted my first funeral. I had been sent to a little town on the north coast of New South Wales. It had quite a large Indigenous population, and my very first funeral was that of a 18-month-old girl, Indigenous girl. And after that funeral, I guess I prayed a prayer that said this: I hope I never get used to this. And 68 years later, I can say, I have never got used to conducting funerals. Only 2 of them have been what I would call tragic, although I guess every loss is tragic. Most of them were people that I'd known, and in the church that I was at in Sydney, there were far too many of them. In fact, one of the men that I knew there said, I have forbidden my wife to go to your church because most of the men that go there die. Now, that had nothing to do with me. Well, I think it had nothing to do with me. And I've conducted the funeral of 2 of my aunts and my mother and my best friend. But I remember what someone said to me. She said, you know, this life is not a dress rehearsal. You don't get another shot at it. There are several images used in the New Testament to describe death. Among those, sleep, moving from one house to another, closer fellowship with Jesus Christ, a coronation. And so many people that I've met with would have echoed Paul's words, I have fought the good fight. I have run the race to the finish. I have kept the faith. Some put it this way: death is the last sunset on earth of some perfect day for a saint called to the Father's house. And when the German theologian who was hanged by Hitler, when he went to his death, he said, this is the end, but for me, the beginning of life. As I've spoken at several funeral services in recent times, I've been reminded of a saying that was on the back of the order of service of one of my very closest friends. I went to school with him, I was in theological college with him, and on the back of that order of service was this, I suppose it was almost a command: live, love, learn, laugh, let go. Live, love, laugh, learn, let go. And I've been with people for whom that last has been what they've actually done. They have let go. Not an easy thing to do. I remember something that I thought would never happen to me. I got a call one day, and it was from a hospice program not very far from here, and it was, my aunt is dying and she wants someone to come and say the last rites for her. Not quite sure that Uniting Church are big on last rites for people. So what did I do? Well, I went down the road and I talked to Father Brendan, and he gave me a book and he said, try that, that'll help you. and it did. Just 4 years after that first funeral I conducted, a book appeared with the title Good Grief. Now, some of you will know where that comes from. Those of you familiar with the cartoons of Charles Schulz will know that this is what Charlie Brown used to say. Good grief. And in that book, the author pointed out that there are 10 things that tend to confront us when we experience grief. Not all in the same order, not all of them appropriate, but they were these. First of all, a state of shock. I remember when my parents came down to visit, it was just about Christmas time and I was looking forward to spending time with them, and my son was certainly looking forward to spending time with his grandfather. And they arrived on a Saturday morning and I found him unconscious on the Sunday morning and he died on the Monday morning. And it was just the shock of that. It was unexpected. And that's followed by emotion. And you know, I was with my mother and I had to be strong for her. Men will know what it means to be strong for someone. And it wasn't until 15 months later, travelling back from the country, when I broke down and was inconsolable, crying for what had happened that 15 months before. There may be depression. We're told in the Old Testament that David asked the Lord, "Why are you doing this to me? Why is this happening?" There may be physical symptoms. We go off our food, we find it hard to concentrate. There may be guilt. Why didn't we do more for that person? Why didn't we spend time with them? We may find ourselves unable to return to usual activities and then find it a struggle to readjust to reality. And not just death brings grief. Looking back on my own life, I can think of being sacked from a job that I liked, going through a divorce, being betrayed by someone at the golf club who told me there was no way known that he would stand as captain, and then putting in a last-minute bid and winning. My very close friend Frank was a very interesting person, and he had one of the most remarkable funerals I've ever been to because he'd organised it before. Can you imagine sitting there in church and on the screen comes Frank looking at you and saying to you, "If you're watching this, you're at my funeral. Hey, you up the back, I don't recognise you. You sure you're at the right funeral?" And then he went on to talk about his life. He'd had a very difficult life in terms of physical ailments. Even though he had cancer, he had spent a lot of his time teaching a blind girl how to use a computer. And at the end of the service, we looked on the screen and there was Frank saying to us, "I've had a good life, a great life. Goodbye." It brought the house down, as you can imagine. But for people there, it was a sense of belonging, a sense of relief. Death, said someone, is the last sunset of some perfect day for a saint called to the Father's house. Gardner Taylor was renowned as the probably greatest Afro-American preacher in America. I met him in strange circumstances. He was visiting Australia, and one Sunday night I got a phone call from people that I used to call the fishheads. They were, of course, the officials of the denomination I belonged to. And they said, we'd like you to do something for us. And that worried me because it was probably because I'd done something wrong. But they said, you know that Gardner Taylor's in Australia? Well, he wants someone to play golf with him. That was hardly a terrible thing to have to do. And I can still remember he hit a very good shot and I was a long way away from him. And I went over to him and I said, great shot, Gardner. And he said to me, and meant it, thank you very much. In speaking about one of his friends, he talked about the way in which that friend had influenced his life. And he finished that eulogy with these words, I know where he is, somewhere where weariness does not come, where winter's chill never troubles, where prejudice never poisons, where the flowers bloom forever, where the song never stills and the day never dies. I know where Sam is. And so as we look out onto our world and see those ones who've been with us and have now gone, these words from the great German preacher Helmut Toorak: we must die, really die, but there is one who goes with us, whether it be to an arena, as happened to the first Christians, or to the gallows, as happened to Dietrich Bonhoeffer, or a hospital bed. That one is always with us. We need someone who will lift and hold us up and who will lay his hand beneath our heads when we must die. And we know, because we would rather have no anyone than him with us. After my mother's death, I went to her library, about 4 books in her library, by the way, but one was Pilgrim's Progress. And there underlined was this quotation from Pilgrim's Progress. Mr. Valiant for the truth, when the day came that he must go home, many accompanied him to the riverside, into which as he went he said, Death, where is thy sting? And as he went down deeper he said, Grave, where is thy victory? So he passed over, and all the trumpets sounded for him on the other side. That's been true of some of the people that I have taken their service. But there's also been another way, like Frank. I can't imagine Frank thinking of all the trumpets sounding on the other side. I can imagine him just strolling in to the portals of heaven and saying, G'day, I'm Frank. May God help us to realise that wherever we are, whatever happens, nothing can separate us from the love of God. Amen.